So I'm Dave Hammond. I'm the medical director at Northwest Passage. We're going to do what we call the initial bloodborne pathogen training today. Some of you have already had it. And just to let you know the background on what this is about, bloodborne pathogen training is something that's required by OSHA that we do it. We're required to do it annually, so you're supposed to be retrained annually. But there's a difference between the initial training and then the subsequent trainings. The initial training includes some basic information about the kind of organisms that we're worried about that can cause disease that you might get by being exposed to blood or other types of bodily fluids. So we're going to be going through this nice slideshow here on the basics of things like hepatitis and HIV and how to avoid it. And then the second part of what we're going to do is what we will be doing annually when I meet with people. And it's the part that I think is actually more important. And in that, I'm going to go over the specifics of your job, like the risks that you would have in your jobs, and the things that we do at Northwest Passage to hopefully minimize the risk that you're going to have. So what kind of protection equipment we have and things like that, and where we keep that. And then the very last part of all of this is I'm going to want to get feedback from you all as you wish to give it. I'm not going to force people to, you tell me what you think. So I want people to give their feedback if they have concerns about any of this stuff, whether it's, could be questions just about what we covered, or concerns about, this isn't available enough for us, or whatever. So, and that's something that is actually not only important, I think it's an important thing, it's actually literally in the statutes that says that an organization needs to provide an outlet for that kind of feedback. And you don't have to wait for the annual training. If you guys ever have ideas about how we can better prevent exposure, if you're worried about that kind of stuff, and you think of things that you want to, either criticisms or ideas, let me know anytime. So let's go through this slideshow, and I'll kind of, I'm going to ask for your feedback about, like, if there's any budding microbiologists here that really want to go into some of these slides, let me know. Otherwise, I'll kind of skip through some of the details on, what's the RNA structure of Hepatitis C vaccine and stuff like that. So let's see, I got it here. There we go. So this is what's going to be covered in this course that we purchased, obviously. So I'm just kind of going over this thing that's made by a company that does this for a living. And it covers what are bloodborne pathogens, why are they harmful, how can you protect yourself, and what's an exposure control plan. So it's the real basic stuff. A pathogen is just any microorganism that can cause disease, and there's those types. There's viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. Anybody want to know more about that? Really has nothing to do with the details of what we're doing. Different ways that organisms can enter your body. You can inhale them, you can eat them, and you can come in contact through blood or other bodily fluids, and I'll go into that later. I'm just going to say blood, and I'll talk about there's actually some other kind of fluids that can carry some of these organisms. Just a really brief thing about, like, the difference between the inhalation and the bloodborne. Why is that important? It actually has been in the news lately about the whole Ebola virus stuff in Africa, that horrible disease that's going around. And there was a big stink for a little while on TV or the radio or something, where somebody had talked about how they shouldn't let people from these countries where this disease exists, they shouldn't let them on planes because then everybody will get it. And the truth is, the Ebola virus is a nasty, nasty thing. But if you ride in an airplane with somebody who's not spewing blood all over you, but if you're just riding in the airplane with them, you're not going to get it because it's not spread through inhalation. And that's similar to what we're going to be talking about today. So that's one way to one thing to keep in mind about what it is that you should even be worried about. And it's you're worried about coming in contact with their blood, essentially. Okay? All right. So Bloodborne pathogens are present in the blood or other potentially infectious materials. I'll show you what those are, and you'll see that hopefully they won't be issues for you for various reasons, like semen, vaginal secretions, cerebrospinal fluid, pericardial fluid, peritoneal fluid, synovial fluid, all of that stuff. Hopefully we're not coming in contact with any of that with the residents. This is an important one, the saliva. So, if a kid spits on you, is that you're going to be having problems with bloodborne pathogens? No, unless there's blood present. So, now this happens sometimes, kids will bite their lip, so they have like a mouthful of blood, and then they spit that. Well, then that's blood. But if a kid, as gross as it is, that kid spit at you, if it's just spit with just spit or saliva with no blood in it, you don't need to worry about this bloodborne pathogen stuff. You still need to worry about catching a cold from that person, and you still should, I guess I shouldn't have to tell you, you should wash your face if they spit in your face. But you don't have to worry about the bloodborne pathogen stuff. Let's see. Any unfixed tissue or organ, like if one of the kids loses their kidney, don't just pick it up and rub it. HIV or HBV containing cultures, that's medical clinic stuff. So that's that. So how do you get bloodborne pathogens? Well, they can enter your body through a break in the skin. So there was an example of somebody who their finger inadvertently went in the mouth of somebody who had blood in their mouth, and they had a sore on their finger. Is that a risk? That actually was sort of a tricky one, but at least in theory you can see how it might be a risk. If there's blood in there, so it comes through the cut in their skin. Or if somebody spits blood and it gets on, or they've cut themselves and they get blood on your arm and you have an open wound. That's one way you can get it. Mucous membranes, which is eyes, nose, and mouth. So blood gets on here. There's a chance that HIV or hepatitis viruses can actually enter my body through that way. Sexual contact, again, hopefully that's not an issue here. And other modes, and I'm not sure why they put that, so I'll just skip that because I don't know what other modes are. So the risk of infection depends on a bunch of things, but the nut of it is, it kind of depends on what is the bug that the person has, how sick are they with it, and how strong or weak is their immune system, and how strong or weak is your immune system, and how much of the blood you got on there. So there's a lot of things that go into determining the risk that you would have of getting something from someone else. Some examples of, I don't even want to go into all this. These are all things that I just take my word for it. You don't really need to worry about those in this setting. So what you need to worry about is this. Hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus, and HIV. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in various ways. So I guess we'll do it now. Hepatitis D virus. Does anybody want me to go through what the illness looks like? The point is you want to avoid the illness, But there it is, flu-like symptoms. And the coloring is really bad, but you notice his eyes are really yellow and his eyes are really white. So this is him sick with hepatitis up here. Okay? And I always ask this, I wonder how they got Tiger Woods to pose for this. Anyway, it looks like him, doesn't it? And you said that before all of the craziness with Tiger Woods, so now it's even better to say. So it's hepatitis B. Hepatitis C, similar thing. It's a bad disease. You don't want to get it. How's that? And with both hepatitis B and hepatitis C, there is a risk of you could die from it. You could require a liver transplant because of getting it. It's not an absolute that you will ultimately need that, a transplant, but it's possible. So it's just a really bad disease. One thing I didn't say about hepatitis B that we'll get into later on is that big difference between hepatitis B and hepatitis C is there's a vaccine for hepatitis B, and so you could protect yourself from it. Hepatitis C, there's no vaccine yet. And then HIV, again, it's a cause of AIDS. As you all know, it's common in the sense of, they say greater than 1 million, and I'm sure the number's higher now because this is about 8 or 9 years old, I think now. The good news about HIV, it's still a horrible disease. You don't want to get that one either. But the good news is that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was basically a death sentence. Some people lived long, years. Other people didn't live years. And now they can pretty much keep it in check if you can take about $40,000 a year worth of medications. But they can keep you alive. They can keep you alive. So, no vaccine available yet for that. All right, transmission of bloodborne pathogens. All this gets to be, it's sort of technical and has to do with the laws and stuff. Don't mean to ignore you guys, but you can hear me okay? So an occupational exposure, this gets into what the statute's all about and some of the paperwork we have to do, but it just means reasonably anticipated skin, eye, mucous membrane, or piercing of the skin contact with blood or other potentially infectious materials that can result from the performance of your duties. So we as a company had to go through and many years ago and define what are the types of ways that our employees could contract bloodborne diseases. So that's what the term occupational exposure refers to, that definition of who is it and how could you get it in your particular jobs. An exposure incident is when you have, if you're in a situation where, somebody bleeds on you on an open wound and you think that you wonder if that's a risk, that would be an exposure incident. So to eliminate and minimize the risk of exposure, we did this exposure determination, and for everybody except Mel, the risk is really the same in that, I think really your biggest risk, and I'll talk more about this later on, has to do with kids bleeding on you in one form or another, and you're coming in contact with them in a way, in a situation where all of a sudden there you are, you have to come in contact with them even though they're bleeding. And when is that going to be? It's going to be in a control hold for the most part. So that's your risk. That's what I would define your risk as. Yes, it's true you might have, if you work in the kitchen, you might have a risk like Mel would have where somebody, a coworker is chopping something up and cuts themselves badly and she runs over and grabs the cut, and thus exposes herself. She's shaking her head, no, she's not going to do that. So you're dismissed because you don't have a risk now. So there is that, but by and large, the big thing that, if I was in your shoes and anytime I was going to even think about bloodborne pathogens, I would think about it in the context of having to do holds and what does that mean. And so that'll be my focus as we talk towards the end. So we do exposure terminations. We have controls, sort of. There's not much. It's not like a factory or in a clinic where we put special covers over the sharp stuff or whatever. So we don't have that kind of stuff in particular. Training hazard communication. That's kind of what we're doing here. Hepatitis B vaccine. I guess I'm going to jump into that now. Do you guys know has everybody had hepatitis B vaccine series? Anybody think they have? Well, you don't have to say whether you have or not. But here's the really good news on this is not only is it available to you guys, and if you haven't got it, I would really strongly urge you to do it. The company pays for it. Just go and do it. And you can ask me about it or Caitlin or somebody. The bigger piece of good news is that because hepatitis B vaccine series has been one of the required vaccines for babies since the mid-90s, every kid that we get through here, I shouldn't say every kid, the vast majority of the kids we get through here have had hepatitis B vaccine series, which means they wouldn't get hepatitis B, which means they can't give you hepatitis B. So it's all a happy thing there. So that being said, so why should you get hepatitis B vaccine? Well, because you never know 100% whether every kid got it and whether got the vaccine and whether every kid responded to the vaccine. There is some risk that when any individual, and I should have looked at this up, but I'll give you a close number. If I get the series of hepatitis B vaccines, which is a series of 3 shots you need to get, the chances of me being protected are somewhere around 90% probably. So it doesn't work for everybody. But the good thing is that when you have a whole population of people, 90% of which are covered, there's usually not enough vulnerable people to keep the hepatitis going, or that particular bug going around much. So anyway, hepatitis I think is the least of our worries, but I still would get the vaccine if you haven't had it. To minimize the risk of exposure, I'm not sure how this minimizes your risk of exposure, but it may minimize your risk of disease, is that if you have exposure, you would go and be evaluated by a doctor. And we'll talk about what that is. And then record keeping, again, it doesn't keeps you from being exposed, but it helps you in the long run if there was ever a problem going down the line. We're obligated to keep records if a person has an exposure incident. Who's at risk? Well, we talked about that, and I don't, unless somebody else wants to talk about it, I think I already covered that. Y'all are. But not very much so, but somewhat. Exposure controls, reducing your risk. I want to talk about universal precautions. I don't know if anybody's heard of that term before. It's huge in the medical field. You know, from the minute I got into medical school, they talked about using universal precautions. And what that means is that if you come upon any person at an accident or in work or anything else, and there's blood involved and that you might be exposed to that blood, you should treat that person as if they do have a disease that can affect you, and so you protect yourself. And that's what universal precautions are. You don't sit and go, well, I'm pretty sure Adam doesn't have any of these things, so then I won't worry about it. You just have to assume that Adam has all kinds of bad diseases, which you might assume anyway. But so that's what universal precautions is, and that's just something you should keep in mind. Always think of it as somebody's going to give you a disease. There's a work practices or workplace practices. That's what we're kind of talking about here. Personal protective equipment. What primarily that means in the reality of our world is gloves is number one. Masks. You know, that I don't see many people walking around with masks on or wearing masks even during holds. And I understand it, and we'll talk more about whether that's a good or bad thing. But we do have masks. We also have in these protection, or in these kits, like gowns that you can put on and stuff like that. I don't see the point of that other than, you know, it might protect your clothing from, you know, getting ruined. It also could protect your arms, I guess, if you're wearing short sleeve shirts. But the practical reality is, I'm not sure you're going to be able to run and get a gown. We have them, and if you guys want more gowns, we'll get more gowns. But that's just the practical reality, is you probably aren't going to be using that. I think they have shoe covers in them too. I don't know the point of that, but they have them. So let's protect your shoes, but you don't get diseases through your shoes. Reducing your risk through housekeeping. I guess that's just a matter of general cleanliness and making sure we're keeping things as clean as possible. Laundry handling. I don't know if you guys literally handle the kids' laundry ever or other laundry. If you do, you should wear gloves. And I would wear, if you don't have a long sleeve shirt on, I probably would put a gown on, just because you don't want to like grab, you know, a bunch of dirty laundry, especially if there's blood in it. You don't want to grab that and not be protected. But by the way, things that have blood on them, let's say a kid had a bloody nose during the night, and there's blood on the pillowcase, and there's blood on the sheets, and he's too little to take care of it, and you're going to take care of it. You know, put your gloves on, put the gown on if you don't have something else to wear, and put it in a bag, take it to our own laundry area, and you wash it. You wash it in hot water, you dry it in high heat, and it will kill anything. So if the thing was crawling with HIV viruses, they're all going to be dead after you wash and dry them. So that's a legitimate way of dealing with soiled laundry. Hazard communication through labeling. We do have, I don't have the picture here. We have bags. If there was ever something, an article that we said was like hazardous waste because of so much blood, there are bags in our cleanup kits that are red bags that are labeled with the thing that says, you know, it's a hazardous waste. And then we have a special way that we would have to deal with it. It would be incinerated at, I think here it's the local hospital does that. Or St. Croix Hospital does that. But that's what Dad's talking about. I guess I'll step in and say, so now I just told you that you could just take these bloody sheets and go wash them, and now I'm saying you got to put them in a red thing and throw them away. The difference is, and there'll be another spot in here that talk about it. The difference is that you're okay, we are okay dealing with that kind of stuff as long as it's not dripping blood, or if like if you try to compress it and blood is dripping out of it, that is something that you shouldn't gather up and take away. We would do a formal cleanup, put it into the plastic bag, and have it destroyed. But if you can hold up that pillowcase and it's not dripping blood, then we're okay just to wash it. That make sense? To be honest with you, I'm not sure that part of me, the scientist of me, would say that I'm not sure why that matters so much. I mean, but there it is. So, universal precautions, we talked about that. Equipment and safer medical devices. The brief thing is, all of you have probably, or maybe most of you have been around when there's kids with diabetes and they have to put their needles in a sharps container. That's the protection device that we really have here. It's about the only thing that I can think of. So we put needles, other contaminated sharp things we put in there. Wash hands if you get exposed. Remove the glass. You all carry forceps around in your pockets, right? So use your forceps that we gave you when you first trained. No, I mean, I guess the point is, be careful if there's broken glass, especially if it's bloody. If it's bloody, don't just go pick it up. Hopefully you would have known that. Anyway, clean up. So the only thing I want to mention off of this slide is that if there's blood, we should clean, or other potentially infectious materials, we got to clean it up in a way that is using a substance that's going to kill whatever it is that we're worried about. And 10% bleach or EPA registered disinfectant. I actually have this sheet. Oh, I guess I don't have it. It's on here. We have a sheet that I just pulled it out of the statutes just to show you that it's out there. It has a list of the different things that work. And the simplest thing is Lysol works, but so do Clorox wipes and stuff. They will work. And we keep in the cleanup kits. There's material. There's a supply of the stuff that you need to wipe up, stuff like that. So, oops. Personal protective equipment, I already talked about. In our first aid kits, there are also masks for doing CPR. You guys have all had first aid, or most of you? Okay. So did they talk about how to use the masks and all of that stuff? Not really.
I've had it before. I don't know if you're on top of last time.
We do have masks in there. I guess that's the bottom line, is to help you breathe, so you don't literally have to do mouth to mouth. So there's something that will help be protective for you. So that's something I hadn't mentioned before. How to remove gloves properly. If you have bloody gloves on, take one, pull it out this way, turning it inside out, grab it with your gloved hand, take your ungloved hand, and pull it out that way, and now they're all in one big bunch, and you haven't touched the bloody part of the glove. Good enough? And if that doesn't make sense, next time you have bloody gloves, just come and find me and I'll help you take them out. Personal protective equipment, eye or face protection and masks. I want to talk about that later when we're talking about holds. Resuscitation devices, housekeeping, we talked about. Laundry, I've talked about. That's the symbol right there. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm in the way. So we would put that on any bags of stuff that we've had that needs to be taken to be incinerated. I've been working here for 18 years and we've never taken a bag to be incinerated. So not that it can happen, but it's not common. Talked about if it's dripping blood, that's when we need to worry about it. Those are the containers. Hepatitis B vaccine, I talked about. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so what do you do if you have an exposure incident? What you do first? First thing you want to do is wash. You know, like if you got blood in your eye, we don't have those fancy faucets that squirt stuff in your eye. So you just get stuff in your eye any way you can and wash it out. If you get blood on your hands, wash them carefully. And so that's the first thing you do. And then what I would want you to do is talk to your supervisor and say, this is what happened. And probably both of you will say, and then I don't remember what we were supposed to do. And so for that reason, I took out, in our exposure control plan, I think I talked about, you know, as a company we have to have this, it's like a 36-page document that's really boring to read. And buried in there is sort of summary on what you should be doing. You know, what are your next steps, sort of administratively, to make sure you get all the stuff you need taken care of, that you feel like you're protected, and all of that stuff. And I pulled out of that 36-page document and put onto one sheet the steps that you need to remember. So, and I forget it too, and you know, because it happens very rarely. And then people will call me and say, "What are we supposed to do?" And then I'll sit there and think, "Shoot, I don't remember what exactly." Did you wash your hands? Yeah. Did you talk to your supervisor? Yeah. Okay, I think you need to go call your doctor, and then I kind of make it up as I go. Instead, go and in the med rooms, posted on there is the summary of. So, where was I? Oh, look it up. It's going to be posted in the med rooms. So you can find that out and look at it and see what you're supposed to do next. You can always call me. People sometimes call me because they want me to tell them whether they have a real risk or not. And how much I tell you kind of depends on how much I know you. Because technically, I really shouldn't be telling you anything because I'm not your doctor in this case, and I don't want to give you bad advice. And I don't want you to go back afterwards and go, you know what, I wonder if he told me that because he just doesn't want to hassle with, you know, me doing this, you know, having to go in and see the doctor and he'll have to read it or whatever. You know, not that I would feel that way, but I don't want to set that up that way. But, you know, I will try to be truthful with you and say, you know, look, you know, if, based on what you told me, yeah, definitely, you need to go in. You know, just go in for sure. You know, this is a risk, and you better go in and take care of it. Or if it's absolutely not a risk, like if somebody says they forget about what I said about the saliva. Here's what I remember: like, you know, remember I said blood in the saliva is a risk, and just saliva is not. This is my way of remembering it. Is back a long time ago, before I was married and I was in college. And if I happened to kiss somebody that I didn't really know very well, I knew that I didn't have to go into the doctor and get checked for HIV when that happened, because you can't get it through saliva. So that kind of exposure isn't a risk. So, but if you forget that and you call me and you go, a kid spit and it, you know, got in my eye, you know, do I need to go in? And I'll say, is there blood? And they say no. And then I'll tell you then, I'll just say that's not a risk. But if it's questionable, I'm going to strongly push for you to go in and make sure you get, you know, good advice. So I'll tell you, I might say, I think it's a really incredibly small risk, but I'd rather have you go in and have it checked out so you get, you know, so you feel confident. So that's how that would go. All right. Employer's responsibility. So we're responsible for paying for any kind of doctor visits you have, and also know that you can and should have the child. If, let's say it was a child, it was a hold situation, and if there's a risk there, you got exposed to their blood, we will ask the child and parent or guardian to have the child's blood drawn to test for hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. If the parent refused, or if it's an older child and they refuse, then we would go to a judge and get a court order that says they have to get tested, and the law is very clear that they would have to get tested, and you will get to know the results of that. So don't forget that not only is an option, we would just do it. We would, if there was a real exposure, we would just push that to the limit. We've had to have that done about 4 times, I think. 4 or 5 exposures, maybe a couple more than that. But in 18 years, it's not a lot. It's, let's call it 10 even, I don't think it's that many. Situations where we thought maybe there's really an exposure and nobody's ever refused, the kids have never refused to get the blood drawn. So it hasn't proven to be an issue. So you get to have a physical, or a meeting with the doctor, and they will, they'll tell you what they think you should do, whether there's a risk or not. And then we would get a copy of those, of their assessment. What I don't want to do, and I think I would try to be really careful, if you're the person and you go in, we don't need to, the doctor will need to know about your whole history, including your risk of having gotten some of these things other ways. I don't want Northwest Passage to know that about you or me. So we would just want to know what the doctor's conclusion was about whether this is a risk or it's not a risk. So medical records, we have to keep them. The training records that you already filled out. Oh, have you guys signed the sheet? The sign-up sheet? So the fact that you did the training will be in your personnel file. We have to maintain it for 3 years apparently. And that's the end of that part of it. So do you have any questions about any of that stuff? No? No. All right. So I'll just do that. And now we're going to go to the site-specific information. I should have pulled this up. Well, I'll just talk about it. No, I won't. I'm going to go see if I can find the document, because it'll be easier if you're all seeing it. So we're going to go to public folders. And we'll go to... Until I'm not very good at that one. Used to use my mouse. Medical documents. Here. So, I already talked about the initial versus refresher. Oh, I didn't show you the movie. It's not nearly as fun as I am. It's like 16 minutes of this sort of cheesy acting. Site-specific information. So I want to talk about that. So we're talking, all of you guys work here, right? We don't have anybody from P1 or P2 here? Okay. So the contact person here, actually, shoot, I didn't update this. Kyle was the medical coordinator, but now since Caitlin came, you know who Caitlin is our nurse, she would be the person that you would talk to for any specific questions. Plus, as I said, you can always feel free to contact me if you have any kind of questions. So the locations for personal protective equipment and cleanup kits. We're going to CAC. So we have the personal protective equipment is in these, what color are those boxes? Like white with blue lettering, I think. Where's the one in the you keep it where now? I'm talking about.
Oh, it's in the, well, it's in the storage locker. It actually, we used to have it in the cafeteria with the other stuff.
Yeah, I think we should put it back up in the cafeteria. It used to be in the cafeteria.
So it wouldn't hang anymore than just that.
Yeah. So, would you help me remember? I'll forget this when we're done. We're going to put it back in the cafeteria. So there should be one of those boxes in the cafeteria. There should be one in all of the living areas. And extra kits are stored in my exam room. But I don't know the last time we ever opened up one of those, to be honest with you. But we're going to make a point of going through them. I was talking with Caitlin about this, and we're going to go through. And we're actually, the other personal protective equipment stuff, which is the gloves, are the last conversation that we had. I talked about this with, I can't remember what group of people it was, weekend staff. They had asked if we could have more gloves more readily available. And so we're ordering up some like dispenser things that go on the wall that the gloves can go into, so you'd be able to just reach and grab it. And we're gonna try to put them in places where they're easy for you to get to, but the kids can't just walk by and grab a handful of them and that'd be a pain in the neck to you. So we'll try it, and then we'll see. Like we're talking about going towards Cedar Unit when you first walk through that door by the OR, across from there, like up there, because they're saying a lot of times, kids are starting to act out in there, and then you need to go in, and they wish they had gloves available. So there are going to be some more coming around that I think Susan just placed the order yesterday. So we'll boxes them out. So you should look around and know where the gloves are and stuff. We're also going to make a move, like I think down in the P3, the far living area. I know that some of the times we'd go around and ask people, like, where do you keep your gloves? Where are the gloves? And they go, well, there's some in the workstation here. And then they start going through stuff and they can't find them. And that's why we want to put them on the walls, just so you know where they are. The other thing that I'll say about this that, and I'll talk about the mask at this time as well, I guess. So I'm lucky enough that I don't get trained to do holds, so I don't have to do holds. And so I'm not in that difficult position that you guys end up having to be in. But as I watch, some of the holds and stuff, I would, if I was in that position, I think I would try to develop more of a culture with the people I work with, that you would just get in the habit of grabbing like a pair of gloves and put them in your back pocket or something when you come to work. Do you do that?
For a while we were.
Just because then, yes, we'll try to put more on the walls, but, then sometimes you might be able to get gloves on before you have to do a hold. I understand that you can't always do that. Sometimes when they're coming at you, you're not going to say, well, can you hold that for a second while I put gloves on? But sometimes you might be able to, or you might have them available, so if I'm doing a hold, and there was one case of a P3 girl about, a couple months ago, I think, that had cut herself up pretty bad, and people had to do the hold, and they didn't have gloves, and she had blood on her. And they ended up, so people chained, the people who weren't doing that put on gloves and stuff, and then they switched out. But just, having them available for each other would be a good thing. The other thing is that people are of different opinions on this, and I don't know there's an absolute right answer, but there's, we have masks, and we have masks with plastic visors. We also have these big, did you see God, we were digging through some stuff. We have these masks that are like cool. They just like go over your whole head. They're scary as hell. But mostly the mask that I'm talking about though is, I just think you draw bad faces on them and all kinds of stuff. But just those masks like this, but that have a plastic shield. If I was doing a hold, I would strongly be considering having developed a culture where if I'm in the hold, and especially if a kid starts spitting, somebody's there, Eric's there, and he puts that mask on me while I'm sitting there. Now, other people have said, well, you really shouldn't be looking them in the face anyway. You should be able to do the hold and have your head turned. Again, I'm not doing it, so I'm not sure. But getting spit on the face is kind of gross. But getting blood spit in your mouth or eyes potentially could be a health issue. So.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when I go home after work, I like to relax and watch Jail, that show on TV. And they always have the butterfly nets when they start spitting at people. They put the butterfly net over the top of their head. So
over the spitter?
Yeah,
we can't do that.
Thought that would be easier than everybody else putting a mask on.
Yeah. No, I'd never heard of that before. That probably worked pretty well to cut out most of it. But yeah, we would be shut down if we did that.
Never mind. Yeah.
All right. All right, it's back on. Let's see, what else do we have here? The first aid kits, located basically in the same places. And again, I think Susan and Caitlin just went through and made sure that they're all have all the equipment that they need in them. First aid kits should be in every vehicle as well, or they have to be in every vehicle. For either of these things, either those cleanup kits that have the personal protective equipment in it. Uh-oh. Oh, I guess I never did plug it in, did I? Plugged it in the back of the computer, but not in the wall. What was I saying? Oh, so they should all be in the same place. If you use any of those things, though, make sure you tell Caitlin or Susan or me that you've used it, because we need to make sure that they have stuff in it. You don't want to go there and you need it and then it's empty, or the part, whatever you need. Then exposure control plans. I have. Oh, remember I talked about the cover sheet of the exposure control plan? That's what it looks like. So, generally speaking, look for that up on the wall, and it says, follow any exposure situation, follow these procedures. And then it has it listed. The exposure control plan itself, that 36-page document or whatever, is in public folders. It's where I just scrolled through to get the bloodborne pathogen training stuff. So this is actually another heading up there, but if anybody wants to see it, let me know. I'll probably counsel you for being sort of weird, but you're sure, you're welcome to look at it. And then the last thing I'm required to say is they also have, I guess I don't have it in these points, but I know in the law it says that there is the actual copy of the statute that governs this, which is, I sort of took a quick glance at it once, and it was, 100 pages of legalese, and that's in there too, and that one I'd really suggest you don't read, but go for it if you want. All right, we talked about the cleanup stuff, and we make sure that we have stuff around to clean up. The cleanup kits, so if there's blood spilled, you go to the cleanup kits, and the things you need to clean it up are going to be in there. So reviewing, universal precautions, remember what that means, treat everybody as if they're infected. Think about for yourself, what do you want to do with gloves and masks? We'll have them available, but there's things that you could do to make it more available for yourself. If you haven't had the Hepatitis B series, do it. If you're exposed, follow the directions on the cover sheet. But first, you wash, right? Wash, talk to Eric, and then the two of you go find us. And then call me if you have any questions. And the last thing is, does anybody have any worries, ideas, anything you want to pass on now? Okay. Look at that, 50 minutes. We're done. Thank you for coming.